All right, crew, are you guys ready to start a new book? It's called God King, a story in the days of King Hezekiah. And it is written by Joanne Williamson. This is the cover. I've never read this book before, so I'm excited to be on this journey with you. I'm going to start with the prologue because I think it's going to help us as we dive into chapter 1. It's only a page and a half, so we'll get right through it. All right, prologue. Here we go. It was children's nap time in the women's quarters, but the boy and the girl in the garden were not asleep. "Hold him still," said the boy. The girl held hard to the injured lamb while the boy bound splints to the broken leg as they had taught him at scribe school. "Where did you find him?" he asked her. "In the main kitchen. I was stealing a honey cake." The boy laughed. "And you came out with this instead?" "They were going to cook him." "Well, they won't cook him now." He laughed again, patted the animal, and watched it hobble off. "You're good at this," said the girl. "Just like a doctor." "That's what I would like to be. That, or maybe a soldier. They say I'm good with the staff and the spear, and it would get me out of here." They gazed around at the high walls, hemming them into the garden with the lotus pool. "I'd be anything to get them out of here, except," the girl looked suddenly into his eyes, "except that I wouldn't see you again." After a moment, he looked away. He caught a glimpse of a tall, handsome youth crossing the garden, followed respectfully by 2 priests. The girl saw him too. "At least," she said, "I'd never have to see him again." "You'd better get used to him," said the younger boy soberly. "Someday." "Never," said the girl. She rose. "They're calling me. I'll have to go now." She walked slowly toward the door of the great house, where the head nurse awaited her, frowning angrily. The boy stared up at the high sandstone walls. A prison, he thought. It's like a prison, except that sometimes they let him out. Like tomorrow, the hunt. He brightened a little at the thought of tomorrow. He glanced toward where the handsome youth had disappeared around a corner. At least, he thought, I'll never have to be king. All right, now we're at chapter 1. Chapter 1, it's titled The Crocodile, or just Crocodile. "Get back in the boat, Lord Taharka, back! You must be ready when he comes." The boy Taharka stood ankle deep in the thick black mud of the great river. It was hot, hot, hot. Not far away, across the lush green banks, the sun shimmered on sand and rock. The boy's skin, black as the rocks on the bank of the Nile, was protected by a loose white cloth that beat back the wicked rays. Already it was soaked with sweat. "He's slow, he's lazy," said the boy, though his heart was beating very fast. "Don't count on it. He can move like the rapids downstream, and you won't hear a sound." For the first time in his 12 years, Taharka had been brought out on a crocodile hunt. The crocodile was sacred to Sebek, the crocodile god, of course, but that was all right, for Taharka was a prince. Not a very important prince, but a prince, one of the many sons of Shabaka, king of Cush, who ruled as a god in the Cushite city of Napata. He had no quarrel with Sebek. He had been taught that all gods were his cousins, and was not really looking forward to the killing. But Mbuta had said it was a lesson, something that must be learned. "Don't play games," said Mbuta grimly. "This isn't the day for it." Mbuta was his uncle, once a slave, now a high captain in the army. Taharka had always followed his orders without question. So now, heat or no heat, he got back in the boat. He leaned back to gaze at the shimmering blue sky, at the water, birds passing overhead. A flock of storks beat by upriver from the great sea of the north, so far away that he did not believe it really existed. though his own grandfather had once seen it. He bowed his head in respect as the sacred ibis skimmed majestically by. So an ibis is a type of bird. It usually has a really long neck and long legs, and it's all white. "Look," said Mbuta. Taharka's heart jumped, for he thought that the crocodile had come. But it was the kingfisher, hovering still as death above them. It dove as he watched, plummeting down like a rock from the sky. The three of them, Taharka, Mbuta, and the net boatman, watched spellbound, as if it had been the first time they had seen it. So they did not realize that the crocodile was really there. He had come swiftly, as Mbuta had warned, only his dark green back showing above the water. He was very hungry and very silent, and the first they knew of his presence was the shock to the boat as he struck it with his tremendous tail. And then the scream, a heart-chilling scream, despairing and wild. Net, the boatman, had fallen into the water. Taharka had once seen a condemned criminal thrown to the crocodile. He had often dreamt of it, but this was real. This was Net. There was only one thing to do. He scrambled to the spot from which Net had fallen, seizing the spear with his iron head. Mbuta was shouting at him, "No, Lord, no! Let him back! Get him!" Sebek was already upon the boatman. Those terrible teeth were closing on his arm. Taharka, now remember, Sebek was the name of the crocodile. Sebek was already upon the boatman. Those terrible teeth were closing on his arm. Taharka struck the beast with the spear and, at the same time, saw the water redden with blood. Net's or the crocodile's, he didn't know which, but the flat head was driven aside. And suddenly Sebek had turned on him, the great jaws opening wide as in his dreams, ready to seize and crush him and drag him down. Something struck him and threw him flat. The jaws had snapped shut, but on the empty air. Mbuta was leaning over the side, his powerful hands clamped around the ugly snout, squeezing it shut. The spear, remember what I taught you." His great muscles were trembling, the sweat was pouring down his arm. Suddenly, Taharka was very calm. He grasped the spear, positioning his hands just as Mbuta had shown him. He fixed his eyes on the thrashing back of the beast, on the spot where the spear must enter at the base of the ugly head. He drove down the spear. The waters churned. There was a great cry from Mbuta, thrown back into the bottom of the boat. Then the waters were dyed red as Taharka had never imagined, and began to grow still. They dragged the boatman over the side. Blood was spurting from an ugly wound on his arm where the beast's teeth had grazed him. He was trembling with pain and shock. Taharka could see that the man might bleed to death. He knew a little of what must be done. All the children of the god were instructed in the sacred medicine at their scribe school. The formulas, the prescriptions, the magic spells. The bleeding must be stopped with a tight binding above the wound. "I can stop the bleeding," Taharka said. "How? We have no cloth," said Mbuta. Without thinking, Tahara tore off the fine cotton cloth, the sacred cloth, so it was said, that shielded him from the sun. He looked defiantly at Mbuta. Mbuta was silent. Taharka hesitated, holding it out to the aging warrior, for Mbuta had stanched the blood of many battle wounds. Mbuta shook his head. "Try your skill," he said. "You've come this far. Finish it." Tahara gritted his teeth. He was frightened. The man's life might depend on what he did. He grasped the wounded arm, feeling for the spot where the terrible spurting must be stopped. And suddenly, he was no longer afraid. He could do it. Blood was life, but after all, it was only blood, and if you stopped the leak, it couldn't get out. It must be tight enough. He needed something to twist with. He broke off a stalk of reed. He knotted the cloth in place. The man lay in the boat, still shaking and moaning. Now that it was over, Taharka found that he was shaking too. But somehow he had never felt better in his life. Mbuta examined the dressing. "It will hold. It wasn't as bad as I thought." They were no longer alone. Several of the small reed boats had pulled up close, drawn by the shouts and cries, men with nets and wooden spears hunting for waterfowl. They stared at the boy with the emblems of the royal clan of Napata on his thin breast. They whispered together, and Buddha pointed one of them out. "You," he nodded toward the injured boatman, "take his place." The fowler, without question, scrambled over the side. "Away!" Mbuta shouted at the others. "What are you looking at? How dare you lift your eyes to the Son of God?" As they pulled away, Taharka heard one of them mutter, "A son of God? He has broken the taboo. He has laid hands on a slave. He has bound his wound with the sacred cloth." Under the burning sun, Taharka felt suddenly cold. The taboo, the law. His flesh was not mortal flesh. He had been taught. His very clothing must not be defiled. He had forgotten about that. What would they do to him when they found out? "I had to do it," he said to Mbuto. "I know. And you being you, I couldn't have stopped you. Hold your head up, and be ready for punishment if it comes. Don't think about it now." And on the way back to the city, he tried not to think about it, tried not to think about the approach to Napata, which he loved, with its great temple and towering tombs. The air had already begun to hum with voices. The scattered huts along the river bank thickened into clusters stretching as far as he could see. After a while, they came to a quay, and the fowler moored the boat. A chariot was waiting, the driver standing patiently beside it. Behind him stood another man with the solemn, self-important air of an official, but Taharka thought that he looked anxious, even a little frightened. He waited while Mbuta ordered a longshore man to put the injured boatman to one of the huts. Then he spoke. "The Lord Taharka is commanded to appear at once in the great hall of the god." For a moment, Taharka couldn't move. Had they found out about the sacred cloth already? But the man spoke again. "All the children of the great house are summoned. The god is dying." All right, so that was chapter 1 of The God King, a story in the days of King Hezekiah. You can tune in for chapter 2 very soon.